Hey guys, before we start this great podcast with Dr. Powell, I just want to clear up a couple of things. So we talk about piano skills a lot in this video. And as somebody who didn't necessarily take piano early in life, it can be really, really frustrating when you get to college. And as much as we talk about that frustration and we kind of play devil's advocate with whether or not it's really necessary, in the way that we mention it in the podcast, that piano is a tool. No one's expecting that every conductor, every teacher, every musician that goes through a college program is going to be playing Chopin nocturnes from memory. But what we do mean is that you can use piano as a tool, the same way that while we were in school, we learned to, manipulate computers to some degree so that we can complete assignments and communicate with each other. So to that end, we mean no disrespect whatsoever to teachers or conductors that are pianists or proudly defend the tradition of learning piano as part of your music education. Moving on, we talk a lot about differences in the approach to conducting technique depending on the size or shape of your body. And I just want to make it really clear that no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, it is absolutely possible for you to find a conducting technique that is clear to your ensemble and looks good from the camera, and not just you, but like the way that you move. So we talk about body awareness, and we talk about the ictus table, which is where a conductor's beat lands reliably. So whatever size or shape you are out there, I hope that if you're considering music education or you would like to be a conductor out there, that you don't see the way that you look or the size that you are as a barrier to be a conductor. And I certainly hope that if you've ever had a negative experience with a conductor or a conducting teacher that told you you couldn't because you are this, that, or the other thing, or that we can move past whatever that experience was for you and help build some basic conducting technique here, because music fundamentally is for everyone. So just those things out of the way, we're going to get going with this conversation. Thank you. Welcome to episode 26 of the Orchestra podcast. We have my friend and mentor, Dr. Ed Powell, with us today. Say hi, Ed.
Hello. How are you?
Well, doing as good as anybody else is, I suspect. Having on Dr. Powell today to talk about conducting. I am not afraid to say that I think in academia, wind ensemble folks are a little more articulate, no pun intended, about the way that they structure an approach to conducting and teaching conducting. And to that end, I've always had a good mentor in Dr. Powell and have appreciated his approach and hope to share that with the students and teachers watching this today. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Ed, and tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and what you do now.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, Nathan. This is a pleasure. And by the way, your virtual background of Lagerquist Concert Hall is quite impressive, and I certainly miss being there. And there is even somebody in the background there. Do you see? Oh yeah, there's some folks on stage.
I bet $20 it's a choir kid.
I think that's Dr. Tagles, actually.
Is it? Well, why am I getting closer? It's not.
I don't know. Anyways, I've been at PLU now for 15 years. I came there from the University of Tennessee, where I spent 5 years on faculty there, and then a few years in a college in Texas after doing my doctorate. I did my doctorate in conducting at the University of North Texas, where I studied with Eugene Corporon, who I can give him credit for everything that I am nowadays, as well as I did my master's degree at the University of Cincinnati and did an undergrad at beautiful University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. So that's how I come about all of this. I think that I've been teaching conducting since I was a doctoral student at the University of North Texas, and I actually very much enjoy teaching undergraduate conducting. The idea that we're, I don't know about more articulate about it than everybody else, but I think we tend to come at it in different ways, and I like to start with the actual basic pedagogy, because I believe that has to be developed concurrently with your musicianship, but the musicianship is more important than anything else. And so to me, the best musicians are the best conductors.
Mm.
And if you're not a good musician, you're not going to be a good conductor. It doesn't matter how pretty you look.
And that is very much an argument that I hear from people that don't necessarily have the most organized approach to their own conducting technique. And I've said this multiple times on the podcast, that traditionally the route to becoming a conductor was first you had to be a really good pianist, and then you
Correct.
had to find an opera company that would invite you to be a répétiteur. And because you can read from a score and play piano and rehearse, they would let you conduct the pit.
Correct.
And then you'd take a pay cut to go conduct the symphony orchestra.
That sums it up reasonably. I mean, that's a little general, but there are other avenues to go. But yes, you can go through musical theater as well. But often it has been the road to being a professional conductor has been through the opera. Correct.
But because of the somewhat American phenomena of concert bands, which is a completely different podcast altogether that has a lot to do with Western Union and string instruments not shipping so well. We have developed this microcosm of wind ensemble music in our country, and a totally different approach to conducting that serves that. That doesn't have so much to do, whereas the sort of in the opera world, the waving the stick wasn't the important part. Now that I've been, out of college for a while and out of academia, but still doing, all of the conducting workshops that are really just a solipsistic enterprise inherently, and can be utterly morally demoralizing for how much money you're spending. But the people who took that opera route, you see that for them, it's about the rehearsal. Mm-hmm. It's not about waving the stick in the performance. And I feel, and I don't know if this is something that I learned from you in particular, that you can have both. That you can have a well-organized rehearsal and a conducting technique that's going to save your third horn player when he's lost and doesn't know which measure he's on anymore. You can do both.
I agree with you 100%. I believe that the technique is just simply in service to the musicianship and the music. The music and your musicianship is first. And if you remember from conducting day one, the first thing I said was, do you want to be a great conductor? Go to the practice room. Mm-hmm. And that is really it. And so, I have met many great musicians who are not particularly good conductors, but I've never met a great conductor that isn't also not a great musician. And that's just it. So it has to be there. So to me, the technique, I developed the technique since we start conducting in the sophomore year, and we have the 4-semester sequence. I start this in such a way, and really have thought about it in such a way, that the basic pedagogy needs to be in line with the musicianship itself. And the sophomore college music major is still a developing musician. And because of that, we start with technique. And technique is something that is quite learnable. And I break it into really very small, easy, simple chunks. And we start just by doing some basic movement, and we start by doing basic pedagogy. And then we begin to then tie that line as to, all right, you do this, and this is what you're trying to do. And so by the time we get into the late second, and into the third semester of conducting, that's when we're really drawing the line of what it is to make, to study a score, to analyze a score, and to make a informed interpretation of that score. But without really some thoughtful musicianship and some chops, it's really hard to do that. We could sit down at the piano, and as long as everybody was a good pianist, then fine. But I'm particularly a very average pianist at best. I sit down and I will learn harmonics and things like that at the piano, but I really don't do a whole lot of that. It's a lot more conceptual. It's a lot more sight singing and listening and various things like that, and a lot of internal ideation that happens.
Well, that's a somewhat unique approach, but one that I identify with. Is so many conducting pedagogues out there, or at least people who are in a place to offer you the chance at a piece of paper that says Masters in Conducting, really demand that you have this kind of piano skill that assumes that you started, at 5 or 6 playing piano. But by the time you're looking for such a program, it's kind of too late to go back and, have started on piano.
It takes many hours.
I can use a piano, is what I say. And, as far as score study needs are concerned, or playing Bach chorales, I'm fine. I was grateful to have studied, on that organ with Dr. Tegels, and to have, figured out the basics enough that I can, accompany my students when need be at solo ensemble, so long as it's, not anything romantic and too challenging. But it's equally possible, from my perspective, to be a good musician and to be able to read the score and identify, what the chord changes are. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how necessary is it to have this score reading ability on the piano to call yourself a conductor, because it seems that the field insists upon that.
Well, I feel like the field insists upon that for pretty good reasons.
Yeah.
The intellectual ability to take multiple lines. Now, listen, keyboard instruments allow you to think of music in a more vertical way. You hear sonorities because you can physically do those things right there at the keyboard. And so therefore, I guess for the young musician that's just starting or thinking about going to college and all that, I would say don't think of your piano proficiency as a barrier as much as a tool to help enhance your musicianship. Because that piano proficiency, I hear this over and over again. Young students will say, why do I have to learn piano? The pianists don't have to learn the clarinet. Or something like that. And the reason why you have to do that is that it makes your mind think of music in a much less linear and more vertical way. And you need to do both. And as a conductor, you absolutely need to do both. So, with that said, I think that the field is changing slowly, but as we all know, the professional field is going to change much slower. And listen, we tend to expect from our students what was expected of us. And so people teach the way they were taught. That's just how it works. And so by doing that, a lot of teachers, especially orchestral conductors within the collegiate field, are going to expect the kinds of things that were expected of them. With that said, those are pretty good things. Especially the keyboard skills. I think it will never hurt you to be able to get around the keyboard, but you're right. It has to happen earlier. It didn't happen to me until I went to college. And so I never became quite a very good keyboardist, but I've had friends and colleagues that have been in piano lessons from the time that they were young. And because of those piano lessons, they are much quicker in their study. And so it's good.
And you can see the piano skills, especially if you're thinking about being a teacher or a conductor, as the piano as a tool or the piano as a musical instrument.
Correct.
And to the person who's saying, why do I have to learn piano? They don't have to learn clarinet. well, if they're trying to be a teacher, I should hope they're going to learn how to play clarinet. But the same way that you would learn how to play piano as a tool, not necessarily as, nobody expects you come out of your, introductory piano keyboard classes, playing Chopin nocturnes, but that, should you, to give you an example, a student shows up late for their solo ensemble performance. This has happened to me more than once, unfortunately. A pianist can't stick around, but there is an available time slot later in the day that the kid can play at. So you look at the Suzuki Book 2 and I could do it.
Right.
And then the student gets a real solo ensemble experience despite the, frustrating schedule change. And because you put in the work to learn piano as a tool, you can fill in that situation.
Right.
Now, if you've got a senior playing the Dvorak cello concerto, you better hope they got somebody who knows what they're doing, because that's sort of the, that's crossed the divide between tool and musical instrument.
Correct. And there are conductors out there that are very, very fine pianists, and they do a lot of vocal coaching, for example, and they do a lot of other types of things. And this is great. And they've used that that manifestation of their musicianship and the fact that they spent many hours dedicated to a piano, really propelling themselves into some pretty great things. And so they get to do Mahler and things like that, which is really a wonderful, laudable thing. I don't know that I don't really know too many professional conductors in the major symphony orchestras that aren't also have great reputations as being fine pianists.
Well, we're starting to see a slight change there, because it was once, as we were talking about earlier, that the only way you became a conductor was already being a good pianist.
Correct.
Despite the fact that the first, documented conductor with a baton was a violinist.
Louis Spohr, we know this.
Of course. Ludovic Merlot, Gustavo Dudamel, violinists.
Yeah.
Our mutual friend Ryan Dudenbostel is a clarinetist by trade. We are seeing more people who are I assume, of course, that all of these people can, play piano to some degree.
Yeah, it's happening more and more, for sure. Which is nice.
Not that we planned on answering this question, but let's set up a hypothetical here. Let's say I'm entering a master's program and I'm a cello player, and I never had the opportunity to take piano lessons. And it's being demanded of me that I learn piano. And I'm really struggling with it. What do you tell to the student when they're coming up against the piano barrier?
Yeah, I think you just have to embrace it and spend the time on it and realize that that's time well spent. If it's an expectation, you're not going to change that. And nobody really you don't want to finish your program going, having somebody say, yeah, they did the bare minimum to get by. You want to be the person that's being said that, hey, they came in, they had some struggles in this area at first, but they worked their tails off, and that's what happened. So I think you just we could sit there and kind of shake our fist going, it's just not fair, but you know what? It is what it is. I mean,
and you can't go back in time and have had taken piano lessons.
Nope.
And
it's not going to work.
For the purposes of this discussion, let's assume that cellist is, really a fine musician, top notch. That's the cello player you want for, let's say you're doing Don Quixote, that's who you ask. But you still do need to have not just the ability to read the score vertically, because as a string player, I always felt that I had that ability reading, Bach fugues and things. We play four notes at the same time with a fair amount of frequency at the highest levels. So I could conceptualize vertically, but just manipulating a keyboard, what was a barrier for me, and one that I saw as a necessary skill to learn. But it is, frustrating if you haven't already put in that work.
Yeah, I very much understand that, and I've had to go through that myself, and I had to pass 3 different barriers at each level of my degrees, that were considered minimalistic barriers, but they were indeed barriers. And so, the application of those skills is good. The people tend to, especially in the vocal world, really emphasize being able to accompany your own choir. So
Yeah.
therefore,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
piano skills are really quite critical. Um, I just think we just need to embrace the fact that it's good for us to do it. And yes, sometimes we're at a disadvantage at times.
Well, but at the same time, having some realistic expectations.
Oh yeah, of course.
For like the choir example, my former colleague Justin Wisnes is one of the best choir teachers out there in Washington State right now. And I think he would openly admit, I would really rather not accompany my students.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of choir directors feel that way as well. They're not all, wonderful pianists, although some of them are.
Yeah, but still, that there is that expectation of using the piano as a tool.
Correct. That's really
exactly
the differentiation right there. It's the tool, and being able to use it as a proper tool.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in undergraduate music students, kind of getting over that no one's asking you to play the Pathétique Sonata. That's not what, but
I'd love to. I love that sonata.
That would be great. If I could play the, oh, good Lord, what's the one with the lady's name, where it starts out with the 16th notes in the left hand?
What the lady's name?
It's somebody's name, the name of that Beethoven sonata. Well, it was in an episode of House, but that's the one that I would, that's the one I always dream of playing someday.
Well, the only one I know that has a name is Waldstein, but
that's the one I'm thinking of.
Okay, then.
Yeah, the Waldstein. Right. So, getting over that no one's asking you to play piano professionally, but can you use it as a tool in the ways that you're going to have to? Can you play a melody and somewhat thoughtfully put some chords to it?
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from there, an approach that you take that I appreciate is that starting with that fundamental technique
mm-hmm.
is leveling the playing field for people of all shapes and sizes.
Yes.
Because there are too many conductors that that really don't care what they themselves look like or what the student looks like. And as somebody who goes to a lot of conducting workshops, you see some really, to use your own term, T-Rexy looking conductors.
Right.
And then some people whose gesture doesn't match up with when the sound is happening, even remotely. But they're doing the trick that the masterclass person has asked you to do, whatever that is. But I think there is a bare minimum technique of what it's supposed to look like that we should expect of young conductors so that the ensemble knows where to put the sound. I mean, right. Fundamentally.
Well, I think, again, one of the first things that we talk about is being predictable. Being unpredictable as a conductor is not always the best thing to be, because you have however many people in your ensemble that are trying to interpret what it is that's going on. And so you have to have some predictability involved in your gesture in order to do that. And so to me, it starts with a mental concept. And I like to think of the arm all the way out to the tip of the stick. So beginning from here all the way out as being the sound that you make, whether that be initiated with a bow or whether that be initiated with air, however it is, that motion has to be what you want that sound to be. And then the tip of the stick is your articulation and the specificity of the parts of the note, beginning, middle, end. and what are those things that are there. And so you start with that basic tenet, and then you can really just break that down very simply. And so when I say we're going to start by bringing people in, I say you set up your ictus plane or table, however you want to say that. You tap that ictus plane or table, you move away at a predictable speed, and then you return to that same place and tap it again, all the while taking a breath. And the breath is the indicator of many things. And so, and it's the predictability that happens with that sequence of events. And so
it's funny you should bring up the breathing, because if you can remember, I was not totally on board with the breathing thing.
No.
When I started out, but by the end of my time at PLU, I was a devotee of the breathing conductor. For many reasons, paramount, it shows wind players when and with how much force to enter.
Correct.
And to some degree, it gives the entire ensemble some description of the time between beats or the urgency of the next beat.
The finest string players I know breathe with each other. And you can see them do that, whether it's in a large orchestra or whether it's in a string quartet. And they just simply, they make eye contact and they breathe together. And it's a full body gesture. They use all of their sensory clues in order to make sure that they are all on the same page and doing the same thing, and unified in what they do. And you can set dynamic, you can set all sorts of subtle things just simply by breathing together. And for that matter, it really helps. Think of a percussionist. A percussionist doesn't need to breathe. I mean, obviously we do in order to stay alive. But he doesn't need to breathe in order to make sound. But every percussion ensemble I have ever seen, they sit there, they look at each other, they breathe together, and they bring the mallets together to play. So breathing synchronizes our clocks. And so to me, that's a day one thing. We do that. And then of course I like to set up, everybody has a different body type, but I like to set up the angles of the arms away from the body and getting things so that it looks like it's comfortable and natural and not awkward. And some of us are very long, like me. Others of us are not as long. Others are, some people are very skinny, and others are pretty round. And some people have long torsos and short torsos, and everybody has to be set up slightly different. And so what I like to do is find balance, but balance becomes predictability. And so, if you're unbalanced one side or the other, or if you're too high or too low, you don't get that predictability. So
this is something that we deal with all the time in the string orchestra world, is that our joints are built to make circles. They make really good, circles. We got all of these joints that, whether they're a hinge or a compound joint, what we are asking of them is to operate together to make straight lines. And so when you see conductors that look awkward, it's that the joints are not operating as a team to make elegant straight lines.
I like to talk to people about the fact that even though we are three-dimensional objects, the conducting is essentially two-dimensional. And the two dimensions are the up and down and the side-to-side axes. And anything that does this is not as easily seen to the ensemble that's in front of you. And so even though we tend to move in space in this sagittal way that's forward and back, that it is not necessarily accomplishing our goals, and that we need to give the artificiality of being two-dimensional. So we have a wall that we stay on that wall, and so in order to be on that wall, as you go up, you extend in order to keep on the wall. Otherwise, you pull away from it like that. And the same thing along with the table. The table, you go along out here and you artificially extend as you go out so that you keep that straight line. Otherwise, you're making curves. And the curved line, it denotes a sagittal gesture. And look, we can get way too into that. But really what you're doing is you want to go up, down, side to side, and you want to be very predictable with those things.
And because we are three-dimensional creatures in space, we have, to create that two-dimensional up and down, we are doing three-dimensional movements with shoulder and elbow to maintain that. I remember there was probably conducting 2 or 3, and I forget what we were working at the time, but I was standing up against the wall in my dorm doing wax on, wax off. And my roommate came in, what the heck are you doing?
Right. That's right out of the Elizabeth Green Modern Conductor book, by the way. For those of you who want to look that up, it's been considered the Bible for conductors. It's Elizabeth Green's, she was at the University of Michigan, and that's her codification of the things that she learned from Nikolai Malko. And those basic exercises, whether they be these exercises or up and down or side to side, are just all about creating fluidity, predictability, even speeds, and various things like that. Very, very useful stuff right there. Because you're training your body. And that whole idea of being on the wall so that you can train your body to how to extend and how to do the things that you need to do in order to create that predictability is incredibly helpful. And a lot of people just don't understand how their bodies move. That's just it.
And the best conductors have this unnaturally tandem body awareness with the visual aspect. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Esa-Pekka Salonen has the closest connection between the way he appears visually and the gestures that he's giving us. And he's one of the few European conductors out there that insist beat is right where the baton hits the ictus. Mm-hmm. And we can have all kinds of arguments about why you want to conduct ahead of the beat. But at the end of the day, if you are sure about where you want the sound to be and then work individually with the different instruments to work on how to line up when you need to start the sound, if it's really clear that this is the beat, that there is no more questioning about where the beat falls.
I agree. And that's hey, look, Von Karajan was probably the ultimate example of being in front of the orchestra. It's really hard to watch all of those old recordings. And of course you can wonder whether or not the sync of the recording and the video are the same and all of that. But, so you can talk about, you can't lead when you're with, you have to be ahead. And yes, all those arguments are there, but there is a definite immediate response, and being able to respond in a very real-time, immediate way it's visceral. It works really well.
Well, and to conduct ahead of the beat dismisses the necessity of the ensemble to know their own instruments and the margin of error in producing the onset of sound.
It also, I agree, and it also, I think that the conductor stops listening to the actual sound that's being made, mm-hmm. and because they have to be in front of the sound. And so by being so far in front of the sound, you're listening to the sound in your head more than you're listening to the sound that's being made. Mm-hmm. Look, I've met some great conductors that conduct very much in front of the orchestra, and their orchestras sound great. So that's really not, it's simply a philosophy and a comfort level. Mm-hmm. It's the ones that are following the ensemble, though, they're the ones that really have problems, because and they're just reacting.
Some of that gets into when you're at any conductor with any ensemble. If there's one of these slow, lugubrious, but still full of lots of little, like what comes to mind immediately is the transition between the third and fourth movement of Sibelius's Second Symphony.
Oh, I love that piece.
I mean, it's the strings need to know when to start that second, sixth, the 16th note, 1/16th note off, but the horns are on the beat, but they start on beat 3. And there's a certain consensus with one contingent of conductors to add additional points of contact.
Yeah.
I am not in that group.
Subdivision. You have to subdivide mentally.
Mm-hmm.
But if you try to over subdivide as a conductor, physically you're micromanaging and it doesn't work.
Well, and it's visually distracting to the
Correct.
ensemble. They need to know, where is that rest that I am counting and waiting for so I can play the next beat. Mm-hmm. If you are a little too obsessed with showing, multiple points of contact too often. Now, when you're doing a gear change, when you're trying to shift from one tempo to another, maybe an additional point of contact is really nice.
Yeah.
Somebody who is not traditionally and ubiquitously known as a conductor, Itzhak Perlman, just put out a video with the students from Juilliard of the Nimrod. Mm-hmm. And he's on there conducting with his hands. And for the most part, people are moving in half and quarter notes. Mm-hmm. But every now and again, you get something really exciting where the part moves with 2/8 notes. And he's doing this kind of thing very slowly. And then when you get to the so you really see where those notes are supposed to move. But you're not going to sit there and go, no. I mean, that's just way too much.
Right. No, I agree with you 100%. By the way, Solinen's Sibelius are pretty good.
Well, I mean, he happens to be Finnish.
I know.
Although the good recordings are with the Swedish Radio Orchestra, which is the funny thing. But Sibelius being, Swedish by birth, of course.
Well, Vladimir Ashkenazy's got some pretty good recordings of the Sibeliuses as well.
He's not so bad.
Not so bad. No.
So, even though this conversation is about conducting and conducting technique, would you tell us just a little bit about the J-term trip that you get to take sometimes at PLU?
Oh, that actually has informed my conducting and my teaching pedagogy quite a lot, because this is a fairly unique class. And essentially what I do is I set up this class and I set up the itinerary for the class based upon the performances that are going on during the month of January in 5 cities. And that would be Vienna, and then Prague, Leipzig, Berlin, and Salzburg. And I like to center the whole thing around the birthday celebration at the end of the month in Salzburg for Mozart. And so they have a large...
Dr. Sven Ronning, but that's...
Well, tip of the cap to Sven Ronning. But they bring in the very best and the best of the world to run this festival, and it's really quite amazing. And so... So I'd like to do a little bit of a balance. And so we go to each city, and each city is going to present various things. I mean, of course, if you're in Berlin and you don't go see the Berlin Philharmonic, you probably ought to have your head checked. Mm-hmm. But the Berlin also has a world-class ballet, as well as a world-class, multiple opera houses and chamber music happening everywhere, as does Vienna. The smaller cities of Leipzig and Salzburg being a festival. Leipzig, it's just very much the home of Bach, Mendelssohn, Wagner, Schumann, people like that, and they very, with great pride, honor those wonderful composers that were there. The fact that Wagner was born in Leipzig. Excuse me. There we go. And the fact that Bach spent almost 30 years at the end of his career there. And of course, there's all the Bach children as well. And so, we go to St. Thomas's Church, where Bach worked, and we go to the Bach Museum. We go see the Thomas Choir, which is a voice choir that Bach taught. Of course, not the same people, but that choir has been around since the 1200s. And the church itself is a spectacular older church.
Recently remodeled.
Well, yeah, well, some of the some of the stained glass got damaged, unfortunately. I was there to see the damage actually this January. So things like that, and of course the Vienna Philharmonic in Vienna, and the Vienna State Opera, and you know, these are all just wonderful experiences. And but I do believe that probably the best things that I've seen have been chamber music,
Mm.
and watching an amazing string quartet, like say the Szymanowski string quartet, you know, watching like Les Vents Français, watching the Berlin Ancient Academy of Instruments play,
Mm.
and really watch all of these chamber groups perform has really, really informed the way that I think about um, how I get my musicians to play together, and what it is that they do. This last January, we were actually in the Hochschule in Leipzig, and I got a chance to hear the Beethoven Mass, and the incredible university orchestra and choir that is there. I mean, you would absolutely not know that these are students. They played at a professional level that was mind blowing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And also to watch student conductors. I saw two student conductors conduct various various aspects, including Petrushka and things like that as well. So it was very the class is really quite interesting in that, and it's a regular class that people actually take. We basically put backpacks on our backs, get on a plane, we go over there, we go from city to city using train travel, all public transportation, and various things like that. And I'm able to negotiate student rates because, you know, we're a university, and so instead of €150 to go see a performance, it's 15.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Europeans are very much in the same way a lot of our major symphony orchestras are very interested in building their audiences, and they know that student discounts is a big deal, and they're just great to us over there. So,
well, part of the conversation I had in an earlier episode with Ryan Dudenbostel was that too often we put the children's concerts or students' concerts or family concerts in this little corner,
right,
where we just do Peter and the Wolf and this, we'll see you next year, you know, have a nice life.
mm-hmm.
But while I was in school, Seattle Symphony started offering, and I believe they still offer, well, obviously not right now when there's no concerts.
Right.
They called it Campus Club. And while you were in Prague or Salzburg at the time, me and my colleague Alan Young, for $12, got to sit in the founders tier and hear Vancouver Symphony, which, comparing to recent performances I had heard by Berlin and Concertgebouw, very much on par. And to hear them in that hall for that price in those seats was phenomenal. And so offering student tickets to all of your regular performances is a way not to put the students in the corner where they aren't given the full meal deal. Because we want people to love real classical music, we need to offer them real classical music concerts.
We went, we saw the real stuff, and real orchestras playing the real deal. I mean, let's face it, in every one of those cities that I talk about, there are major professional musicians, and even the Prague Philharmonic, which is not necessarily internationally as known as, say, the Concertgebouw or the Gewandhaus Orchestra or the Berlin or the Vienna. It's an incredibly fine orchestra.
And how many orchestras has recorded all 6 movements of Mav Lost in recent history that are not that orchestra?
And I'll tell you, so going to see them and hearing how incredibly well they play together, and just the living, breathing being that is the organism of this orchestra playing, it's really incredible. And of course, you know, there's something very very kind of soothing about hearing Viennese play Mozart.
Mm-hmm.
they know, they understand how to play Beethoven. And it's not that we don't. I mean, that's not it. It's just that this is something, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's cultural. And they, there's a different feeling sitting in the Musikverein, listening to the Vienna Philharmonic play Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. It just feels different. Whether that's the fact that you're in this beautiful old concert hall and you're hearing one of the world's greatest orchestras and they're playing one of the finest symphonies. It could be that, or it could be the fact that Beethoven lived most of his life in Vienna. And these people grew up playing his music. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it's all of those things. But it's an incredible experience that for the money, a student, music or otherwise, is very lucky to get a chance to do. Studying away, short-term or long-term, is a life-changing experience.
Well, as we bring the conversation back to conducting technique, this is a great stepping stone. Somebody that you've seen recently with the Berlin Philharmonic is their new principal conductor, Kirill Petrenko.
Yes.
Who is the absolute master of what you refer to as impulse of will.
Yes.
I think his stick technique is questionable, but what is on his face is so clear, genuine, and authentic that really it doesn't matter what he's doing with the stick, because you know exactly what he wants just with the eyes.
Well, it's everything. And honestly, you know, I mean, if you want to talk about stick pedagogy and things like that, I think you start with what do you hear and what's the sound of going on in the orchestra. And when we heard him do Mahler, I was mesmerized by the entire thing. And we got to sit back on the choir benches. And so I was looking right at him the entire time. And I noticed no deficiencies. That guy had it all together. It was just a masterful performance, and we waited and waited for the Mahler hammer, and it came down, and it was fantastic. So yeah.
Oh, so it must have been Mahler 6.
It was indeed, and all 90 minutes, and I'll tell you what, that 90 minutes, it went by in a heartbeat. We were just so mesmerized by the entire thing.
Well, and famous conductor Sergio, everybody pronounces his last name different every time I hear it. Calibadache, however you want to pronounce it, is famous for refusing to record because he believes that part of the listening experience is being in that hall, and part of being conductor is determining tempos and articulations based on the space that you're in. Mm-hmm. And Mahler 6 is very much one of those pieces that kind of doesn't make sense on recording. Sometimes there's ideas and tropes that come back again and again, and you feel like, well, I've heard that before on the recording. But in the live performance, when themes come back, there's something different and changed and new, and that make you anticipate what happens next hearing it live.
Oh, and just the sheer appreciation for the level of ensemble as well as the level of artistry by the individuals within that ensemble.
Well, and endurance. I mean, let's be serious. The endurance to play that piece.
You tell me those trumpet players and trombone players and horn players. Oh God, the horn. It's unbelievable. And I don't know, the concertmaster literally had me in tears with some of his solos. It was just...
was it Noah Bendix Balgley or whatever it is? I think he's from Philly.
Yeah, well, he's been there for a while. He's been part of that.
Tall, thin guy, plays the pants off of everything.
And I won't say older. He's probably at least my age, but yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but it was phenomenal, and Kirill Petrenko. The idea of impulse of will, and it's not, I always have to say this, and I say it with a joke, but it's not impulsive will, it's impulse of will. 3 words. And it's the idea of, your impulse being interpreted by all the people in front of you the same way. And you're right. Carol Petrenko is as good as anybody I've seen. Just
Well,
amazing.
and that a big part of conducting is getting yourself to feel the emotion that you want conveyed in the music, and doing that with authenticity. I can remember back to one of the conducting excerpts we did together in class. I forget what it was from, but it was a Shostakovich excerpt. And I think that's right before, it was probably right after I had found out I had lupus and I was really kind of struggling. And there was something about the darkness of the Shostakovich and the way that I was feeling that day. And as you're doing your voiceover, it was like, Nathan, I can tell you're really feeling this music and it's being conveyed in your gesture very much. It's really working. And I'm sitting there listening. And I was like, well, of course, Dr. Powell, like I was just told I have this terrible illness.
Well, yeah, I think you're talking about the, it's originally a piano prelude in E flat minor. And so it's I think it's opus 14, opus 34, number 14. That is it. So if you guys want to look it up, that's what it is. And it's just really, really very angsty and dark. And I use that particular excerpt much in the same way I like to use Tristan and Isolde to get people to not worry about the actual conducting pattern as much as they worry about what it is you're conveying.
Yes.
Because the music itself moves at a slower rate, and because of that slower rate, extraneous motion is not necessary. Learn how to be really efficient with what you're doing and only convey those things. And a lot of people, when they first start with that Shostakovich excerpt, they try to subdivide it because the eighth notes go by so slowly. Well, but that's all sorts of extraneous motion, because it starts with kind of a pulse that just goes dee, ba, ba, and that's all. And so really, all they have to do is know where the and of two is. So why give everything else?
Well, and that plays into two things, both the impulse of will and also the trust between conductor and ensemble.
Right.
That I trust that the ensemble respects me enough to follow where I'm going to lead, and I'll do my best to show the ensemble where that eighth note is supposed to be without waving my arm 2 extra times every beat.
Correct. That's correct. It's really funny because impulse of will is also an Elizabeth Green concept of Nikolai Malko, and those concepts really came from Elizabeth Green down to H. Robert Reynolds, who then was my teacher's teacher, and would go to my teacher, and then came to me from there. And so, in many ways, it's kind of just a lineage of concept, but impulse of will is an industry standard term at this point right now. And the idea that you can conduct in many ways, it has to do with interpretation of intent. And this whole idea, you can get into the whole inner game of music and all of that with the awareness, will, and trust. And that's certainly part of it as well. But the idea is conveying your intent in a way that it is going to be interpreted in a common way. So that was using too many of the word ways, but that's how it works. So basically, common intent, predictability, making sure that you're giving a unified message to the ensemble, not distracting with a lot of extraneous stuff.
Now, as my students are watching this, and maybe we do a conducting project, we talked earlier about that we've got all different shapes and sizes and kinds of people, but we are beginning to have plenty of examples of people of all different shapes and sizes making it as professional conductors. I mean, Sarah Ioannidis with Symphony Tacoma, when I see her conducting, I don't think there's a great female conductor. I think dang, there is a great conductor.
Correct.
So what are things that we need to think about regardless of our body, or maybe with our bodies in awareness of their capacity to still be a clear conductor?
Well, again, going kind of back to the basics of the idea of being predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I very much like balance. And so
Mm-hmm.
the right side, the left side, and the center are all in balance with each other. And so if you have a larger center frame, then you're going to be larger to the outside as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it has proportion. I guess
Yes.
proportion is a better word. And then, you don't have to move so tall up one direction and down the other. You keep things in a proportionate area. And then also to know that that pulse matters,
Mm-hmm.
but pulse is not the conductor's responsibility. You just have to have it. The
Mm-hmm.
pulse is the ensemble's responsibility. So you set that pulse,
Mm-hmm.
you maintain that pulse here, and trust that they're going to do the same. And that's hard, especially younger groups have trouble with that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you have to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to being, I think being proportionate and balanced is the most,
Mm-hmm.
don't be collapsed down at the side. This is what I like to call the T-Rex arms,
Yeah.
and all that, or, no, don't be too flappy. The elbows tend to be,
Yeah.
if
Don't
the
take
elbows,
flight.
yeah, if the elbows are below the wrist, for example, it looks weird. But if the elbow and the wrist are at the same level, that looks proportionate. Things like that.
Well, I was in a conducting masterclass with Neil Varone, who teaches
Mm-hmm.
at the Eastman School, and there was a very lanky conductor doing an excerpt. And I don't know if you've ever interacted with Neil Varone, but he's sort of if Danny DeVito and Bernstein met in one person. And he stops the rehearsal and says, "Are you conducting from the baton or from your elbow?"
Right.
what is the ictus point? Is it your elbow or is it the point of the baton?
It's
And
usually the lowest point. And
precisely.
so therefore, if everything is at the same elevation, the tip of the baton is what the focus point is going to be.
And I think a great analogy for people to think about in terms of your size or your body type is like a batter's box. When you're watching baseball and ESPN puts up that, the square of what's in and out of bounds.
Right.
There's no judgment about a person's size or what they look like or how long their arms are. This is the space in which we can operate. So as a conductor, if you've got to put your elbow out here to get around your body,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're going to have a smaller area of operation for your gesture. But what you do within that is still up to you, and is very free. I mean, you can do whatever you want within that realm of possibility.
Correct.
As soon as you start trying to, oh gosh, like if Randy Johnson, the famous pitcher,
6'8".
Yeah, watching him bat when they played in Toronto was just hilarious. Because being so tall, but he would squat down really low to bat. And if he would stand up in the middle of a swing, that means his batter's box went from this to, that. Right. And so if you change the rules on your ensemble by going from my arm is out here to like in here, or now I'm doing this kind of thing, you have eliminated that predictability. Mm-hmm. So whatever your size and shape is, just getting over your own limitations is in terms of your operating space as a conductor, mm-hmm. will free you up to communicate with the ensemble better.
And I mean, as well as I do, because you've been through it, that my rules are really prescribed, and I make people do it no matter how much they don't want to at the very beginning, mm-hmm. because it's in the same way as developing, basics on your instrument, you have to know what the fundamentals are first before you can kind of modify those fundamentals.
You got to know the rules before you break the rules.
And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that there are people that will never break the rules, and so they'll always look a bit robotic because it's very prescribed. It is, I mean, it's very specific and very prescribed. So because of that, you know, I do like to encourage them as they get more and more comfortable with the act of conducting, to become more themselves. And as you were saying, you have to just figure out how your body moves. I find that dancers and athletes are oftentimes least, they appear naturally physically better at the beginning. And the reason for that is because they are used to analyzing the way their body moves. Baseball players, that's a good example, because baseball players tend to work with the smaller twitch muscles and the longer, more powerful muscles, and they understand how to work that in tandem in order to create what they need to create. So they can have those quick bursts as well as the long, powerful strides and things like that. And just like in dancers will micro-analyze every single placement of the finger, let alone what's the shape of the arm and what's this and that.
And to that end, it can also start looking a little stilted.
Yeah.
If you have someone that is, you know, body conscious, body aware, too much so, it can look like they're getting behind the beat, or that each beat is choreographed.
Right.
And for me, as a member of the ensemble, that takes away the element of predictability, because I'm too busy watching the moments that should be, you know, they should be leaving me with some amount of anticipation, but I'm just watching this choreographed movement rather than, you know, point A, point B, and the transit between.
Well, and a lot of that will also have to do with the musicianship of the individual that's doing it. You can have somebody that's incredibly graceful, but if there's no content behind, no intent as well, behind the motion, it's not going to mean much. And so that's, I mean, it could look beautiful, but if without the intent, it's empty.
Well, and the quality of sound has everything to do with the acceleration between points.
Right. That's correct. And the
it's not
predictability of that.
Just, you know, I'm moving at this speed between these 2 points. It's I'm moving a little slower or quicker at first, and then I slow down as I approach the beat to indicate something like a forte piano or what have you.
Well, if we're going to wrap that whole thing up, we have to talk about the fact that the arm motion, the body motion going out to the tip of the stick is what you want the bow or the air stream to be
Precisely.
Like. And so has to be that. It can't be, or you know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has to show what it is you want the airstream or the bow to be doing, and that's where the predictability comes in, and that's where I think the better conductors really communicate well. They look like the music, and by looking like the music, they're moving in such a way that is at least evocative of what it is we want it to sound like.
Well, on the same conducting workshop that I was working with Neil Varone at, in another area of the world, Rodney Dorsey was working with the wind and brass students, and I cheated a little bit, and I went and watched a little bit of his, and I don't know if he said this on purpose to be so profound, but it stuck with me. He asked a student, did that look the way you wanted it to sound?
Right.
And whatever size you are, however long your arms are, I think we can all ask ourselves that question as a conductor. And it also brings up, to what degree do I conduct the minutia of certain groups that need certain interests? And that could get very involved in rehearsal process versus performance. But for example, the opening of Schubert's Fifth Symphony. Too many people are over-focused on the violin entrance. Rehearse that, get it right. And as long as you show them where, the beat is more or less, they'll get it if you've practiced it enough times. But every time I see a conductor walk out there and go, dee da, dee da, it's like, can you just, dee da, dee? It's kind of in one, it's kind of in two, it's not, but
Right.
does it look the way you want it to sound?
Right.
If you can do it in two and get that smoothness, good for you. But don't don't be over obsessed with getting the digga 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 dum. That's a rehearsal thing, not a concert thing.
Yep, I agree, 100%.
Well, as we reach the denouement of this conversation, uh, tell us what's so special about PLU, especially maybe that J term. I don't think that's something a lot of schools offer. And if I'm a musician, but maybe not looking to major in music, why might I consider PLU over other places?
Well, I mean, honestly, there are a lot of good places to study. And I really very firmly believe that you, as a musician, if you're going to go major in music, okay,
Mhm.
you have to look at a number of things. First of all, your private instructor, you have to have a good relationship with your private instructor, and you have to trust that they are going to get you where you want to go. That's
Yep,
really the number one
absolutely.
important thing. And then how do you apply that instruction that you're getting? And that's going to be in your ensemble experience. And your ensemble experience is got to be nurturing to you, so that you are uh, feeling elevated, and
Mhm.
that you're getting, for example, can you imagine going through, your entire undergrad with never playing a Beethoven or a Mozart or something like that?
Yeah.
So, okay, so there's that. Now, the idea of the access to opportunity for the major, the non-major, the musician, that's really where PLU distinguishes itself.
Mhm.
You get travel experiences, you get major performance experiences, including places like Benaroya Hall, and things like that. And listen, are we unique in that? I think we are, but it has to do with having this really great um, kind of team of incredible private teachers, of high-level operating ensembles that believe in the performance experience, and performance experiences are many.
Mhm.
And by many, I mean they are campus on, at home campus concerts. They can be going with the choirs and the orchestra to Benaroya Hall and performing the Christmas concerts, or it could be going to Portugal
Mhm.
and performing in the great halls of Europe. All of these things PLU is very committed to. And one other thing that I think is very committed to, they're very understanding that the art of music and the art of composition is alive, and that we bring composers to campus. We do world premieres,
Mhm.
and some ensembles, my ensemble does a little bit more of that, but still, every ensemble on campus has premiered major composers' music, and to work with a composer on something that is a developing, breathing process is really important.
Well, and I don't feel I am a unique breed in having played a premiere with Wind Ensemble, Choir of the West, and the orchestra.
Right.
That's maybe a small group of people that have done all three. But I forget the composer that did Cosmos that I played bass in for Wind Ensemble.
Cosmosis, yeah. You're talking about that was Susan Botti with the
Mhm.
women's voices and all of that as well.
And of course, Dr. Nance has the kibosh on Eastern European or Northern European composers, and they're out there all the time doing things with the Choir of the West.
Eric Eschenwalds, and they just released a CD of a bunch of his music. So
And Dr. Jerry Crocked was really starting to get going as a composer as I was leaving PLU, and we did a number of his things. And the tribute to Dotman, Skip Dotman.
yes. Oh, what was that piece that you did that with the orchestra?
Hmm.
But yeah, the wind ensemble has done 24 world premieres in the 15 years that I've been there,
Hmm.
and 30 37 premieres altogether. And whereas whether we were the first ones to perform a piece, we'll call it a premiere if we are west of the Mississippi and the first ensemble to do it. So I'll just call it a West Coast premiere.
Hmm.
So, but still, and sometimes that's also done by some of our student composers as well as Dr. Utes. So
I played a number of his premieres,
yeah.
and is always very intellectually motivating music.
He
Uh,
he's a deep dude.
he was my first podcast guest. Very inspiring.
Yeah.
But the J term in particular, I think for people who are looking to go into medicine or nursing in particular, or music ed, which is going to be a heavy course load no matter where you go,
Mm-hmm.
to even consider having an opportunity to study abroad
Mm-hmm.
is probably out of the question on your average quarter system.
Yeah.
But to have just January where you can do more or less whatever you want and still be on track to graduate allows you that opportunity to do this, a tour of Europe with Dr. Powell, or I think they even do a trip to Antarctica if you want to go really out there and say you've been to all 7 continents.
Yeah, they do that. They usually offer anywhere between 15 and 20 courses that go everywhere. They can go to India, they go to Australia, New Zealand, and they're all of varying types. I mean, it could be a business class, it could be a biology class, it could be a religion class, it could be a music class, and so it just depends. And they are offered on a fairly substantial rotation. And so during the time that a student is there, January is the perfect time to do those kinds of things for sure. Some places in January a little bit more, let's say, attractive to go to than others. Traveling to, I suppose, northern Germany in January is a little bit cold. But a lot of people really enjoy the New Zealand class. There's a hiking trip that goes to New Zealand as well, and that's ecology and various other things. And of course, there's a religion class that studies Asian religions in Honolulu. So that's not a terrible thing either.
Well, as we wrap up this conversation, where might my students start to look for more information regarding conducting technique if they want to get started? What should be some first steps for your aspirational conductor?
Well, what's really cool is YouTube. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
YouTube has really got their kind of foot on a lot of things, and particularly love the amount of repertoire that's out there that never used to be. But there are also instructional videos on conducting. And if you go, for example, the Army Field Band has some things, as well as others, and they do some basic things. My good friend John Lynch, who is the director of wind ensembles at the Sydney Conservatory, has done several kind of beginning, here's how you hold the baton, here's how you do this kind of videos, and those are all out there as well. So I would say start with YouTube. And then, you've got conductors right in front of you. You're in a school group, and you should go right up to them and say, hey, how do you do that? And then volunteer. Whether volunteer meaning to conduct a pep band, or whether it means to run a sectional or something like that. That's what leaders do. Leaders will do that kind of thing, and they will learn a lot by figuring it out on the fly. So I'd say start with, go to YouTube, start with the teacher you have in front of you, and then do a lot of volunteering.
Excellent. Well, I've got a couple more questions off the air, but thank you so much, Dr. Powell.
You're welcome.
Really appreciated this conversation.
It was fun. Thank you.
All right.